Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Sinclair. I'm
And I'm
John.
Aaron.
And today, Aaron, we're going to be talking about rock and
Yes, my
wrestle.
two favorite things, Boat.
You know, it's funny. What do you think the connection is between rock and roll music and professional wrestling? Because you see it everywhere. The Honky Tonk Man, Rock and Roll Express.
Honky Tonk
What?
Man. That's not even rock. That's Honky Tonk. That's the first
Maybe
guy
you're right.
you came up with, was the Honky Tonk Man. Not heavy metal,
But-
Van Hammer, Big Mountain Rock, any of those guys.
Yeah. So, what is the connection? Why do you think so many people that are drawn to rock and roll music are also drawn to pro
Well,
wrestling?
I don't think they are now, but back in the day when rock and wrestle was out. Listen, think about it. Who watches wrestling? Like teenagers, like testosteroned up goofballs. You know, they want to go see a bunch of guys get crushed violently. Same thing of going to an old rock show. You go in there, testosterone's on 12. There's crazy loud crap going on. People are fighting, and there are chicks around. It's glorious. Fireworks. It's exactly the same thing. Lots of glorified
That's true.
violence.
Yeah. Who is your favorite outfit that incorporated rock and roll in pro wrestling? Was it the Rock and Roll Express?
Well, I mean, what did they do? I'll tell you something. I went to a show in Charleston where Ricky Morton did sing a little. Ricky Morton of the Rock Express had an album that they produced. He was horrible, by the way. Then, of course, you've got the Freebirds, Michael P.S. Hayes with his Bad Street album. That was a rock album.
Bad Street, Atlanta, GA.
But a lot of wrestlers cut albums. Jerry the King Lawler had albums. I've got a Larry Zbyszko album that I bought from Larry Zbyszko sitting around here. So that you had a lot of those. Of course, Jimmy Hart had a gold record. He was part of the that band that sang "I Keep on Dancing." Was it the Chandels or something like that? He was in that band. So there's a connection there. In terms of rock and roll, my favorite act that incorporated rock and roll, you know, I don't know, man. I mean, in the day when you had real music that the wrestlers came out to, that was a pretty cool. I used to see the Road Warriors come out back in Charleston. They would come out to Black Sabbath, you know, War Pigs. No, what was? No, it was I Am Iron Man. It was Iron Man, and that stuff would kick up, and those big burly dudes with the spikes that would come out. Pretty scary.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'd say that was right near the top of the scary rock-themed killers that would come out. What about you? What kind of goofy answer do you got for your own question?
Well, I'm a total mark for Marty Jannetty. I love Jannetty so much.
You don't know who he is, do you?
Yeah, I do.
You saw him on a tweet.
What? No. I've always liked Jannetty. I mean, how can you not like him?
Okay, what act was Jannetty in?
He was in the Rock and Roll Express.
No, he was not. No.
All right. It's possible that I don't know who Marty
don't
Jannetty
have
is.
any
You called
idea.
me out. You're right. He was in a tag
The
team.
Rock and Roll Express was Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson from Tennessee.
Those guys sound lame. Jannetty should have been in there.
Jannetty was with Shawn Michaels and the Rockers.
See, I mean, I was
No,
close,
you weren't.
right?
You weren't close. You don't have any idea. You've never seen him work one time. Admit it.
I admit it.
Why did you bring him, of all the wrestlers that ever lived, why did you bring him up? Is it because recently he had a
Marty
controversial
Jannetty
tweet?
sounds like the ultimate wrestler name. I got to be honest with you.
He's famous for getting thrown through that glass barbershop window by Shawn Michaels when they broke up the tag team. That's his big, and also the drugs.
Now, did the Rockers actually, did they incorporate the rock and roll music into their act in any way? Did they have like air guitar finishing moves?
They just came out to some Lawrence Welk. Of course they did. It's the Rockers. What do you think they're going to come out to?
It would be awesome if they came out to Lawrence and the 1 and the 2, and then they come out doing the bushwhacker
You have
thing.
lost
I'd
your
love
mind. No, that wouldn't be awesome.
Maybe we should talk about this week's game, Aaron. Rock and
With
wrestle.
that lead in, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure, but what the hell? We're already here. Bam. Rock and wrestle. Now, Boat, had you ever heard of this bad boy?
I'd never heard of rock and wrestle before. This is one that I took off the shelf. Speccy tapes that I have here in Amigos Studios. You know, Roshi. Yeah, Roshi plus Pixels at Dawn plus several other listeners over the years have sent us a bevy of ZX Spectrum tapes, and so for this this new incarnation of the show, I just like to go through the tapes and I pull things out and I look at the instructions, and if it looks interesting, I'm like, well, maybe we should give this a shot, and that's how this came to be.
Well, it's funny. I had never heard of Rock and Wrestle as a game. I was familiar with this game by its American name, Bop and Wrestle. And my buddies had Bop and Wrestle for the C64. That's where I played it way back in the day. That's where we got our fight on, because we were desperate sort of wrestling on any sort of system. So I'd never heard of the alternative title for this, but yeah, this was known in America as Bop and Wrestle, and this is one I would see all the time at the store. Like this was everywhere, but that I remember it distinctly. The cover for it was the disc version. Was red with a huge bunch of crowd on the front in the wrestling ring. And on the back was the important part, because it would list all the moves you could do in the game. And it looked like there were 4 million moves. I was like, oh, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think this is a classic example of the publisher, Melbourne House. They had that huge hit with Way of the Exploding Fist. Yeah. And so what they did was they poured all of that money into a marketing budget that could beat the band. And that's why you saw this game everywhere. And it got so many releases on so many platforms.
I assume it was pretty popular. So Rock and Wrestle, as it was known in Europe, released in 1985. And Boat mentioned that this was published by Melbourne House, developed by an outfit called Beam Software. Beam Software, a little trivia note was on Moby. The name Beam came from combining the letters of the names of the early members of the group. So they had a guy named Naomi Benson and Alfred Milgrom. So they took Benson and Alfred, and that's where they come up with Beam. So the people that worked on the Speccy version didn't do a ton. It was Stephen Taylor, who did Knuckle Busters and Galliotron. Frank Oldham, who was an artist, so I'm assuming he had something to do with that opening screen. He worked on Doc the Destroyer, Fist, Fighting Warrior, and Doc the Barbarian. Every one of those titles sounds straight out of the 80s, Boat.
Yeah, Doc the Barbarian. I can't wait to cover.
The other fellow, Ben Warthrow, from what I could tell, he didn't have any other credits on the Speccy. So this was a wrestling game that you could play with 1 or 2 players. So right away, you've got one versus the computer, which is cool. That wasn't always the case on these games. So I thought that was
sure.
In fact, when this came up, I wasn't sure there was a 1-player mode, but I was happy to see that there was. So what do you do in this game? Well, you play a wrestler, and you're going up the ranks of the other wrestlers. Now, this game got released, as we mentioned, for the C64 and a few other machines. They had releases on the Amstrad CPC. This one surprised me, but the Apple II got a release of this.
Oh, that is interesting.
The C64, the Atari 8-bits. Did you know this is out in the Atari?
I'm gonna have to check this out. I had no idea.
Look at, and DOS also got a port. So I was surprised that this got that many ports. Now, so the whole plot of this thing is you are Gorgeous Greg, the blonde hero wrestler, and you are tasked with going through the ranks of the bad guy wrestlers to basically claim the championship of the Rock and Wrestle Federation. It's a shame that the Spectrum version they sort of got screwed, didn't they, Bo? Because they didn't get all the other wrestlers that the other versions did. But
right, I don't know if you want to switch over to that screen with you where you have all of the wrestlers. So out of the 10 wrestlers, including Gorgeous Greg, that are included in the other versions, the Spectrum only got 5. So half of the amount of wrestlers. We only got Redneck McCoy, Missouri Breaker, Vicious Vivian, and Lord Toff. So if you wanted to play as L.A. Bruce or fight L.A. Bruce, you're out of luck.
Who wouldn't, frankly?
Yeah.
Now, as far as I can tell, the wrestlers, so here's the thing. You get into this match, 1 or 2 players, and you basically fight the wrestler in the ring. So in that aspect, it's a pretty standard wrestling game. This is a very ambitious title for the Spectrum. Wouldn't you say that, Boat?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the most ambitious titles from this time period, from 1985, probably, that came out.
So this one graphically is not in the same stratosphere as any of the other versions. And plus, like we mentioned, it has less wrestlers. And so when you get into it, I thought to myself, well, this one could be a dud. But having played it before, I gave it another shot because I knew something about it. And the way this game works, of course, you only got one button there on the Spectrum, but this game was way ahead of the curve when it comes to controlling your wrestler. Now, it's not the easiest control system to latch onto, and that's an understatement. But they sort of went the same way that like a Panzer Kickboxing did, Bode, if you'll recall that game.
Mm-hmm. It's very similar to that.
The moves you do are situational, and they require you to move the joystick in one of four directions and hit your button. And what you end up with is a lot of moves that you can do. I mean, it's a surprising amount of moves that you could perform. In fact, I got a list here. I'm not going to go over 1 million moves, but it's worth noting just to give people an idea of the amount of moves we're talking about. So the moves listed on the box, you've got the airplane spin, the arm spin, arm twist, atomic drop, backbreaker, body slam, clothesline, drop kick, elbow drop, flying body press off the top rope.
And you may be wondering, it's like, well, how can you get so many moves out of just, holding down a button and pressing a direction? Is the answer is that they're all contextual. So you have a set of moves that you can perform to soften your opponent up. Okay. And then once you enter into the grab, what do they call that phase where they kind of the grapple, right? Once you enter into the grapple, there's a whole set of moves that can be performed from there. If you manage to get your opponent into a headlock, that's another 4 moves right there. The power lift, uncovers the turnbuckle. So in pretty much any situation, you have at least 4 moves available to you at any one time. It's a pretty impressive way to work a lot of moves into the game.
Now let's talk about how that actually works. Because we've established there's a lot of moves. When you walk around in the ring, your wrestler and your opponent will be facing certain ways. Okay, and this is sort of the Achilles heel of this game, and this is pretty much the same on every system I've played it on. To really grapple with your opponent, you have to sort of be looking at him, and depending on where he's at will depend on which way you need to be facing. And so a lot of the game is lining up things, I find, and then getting close enough to do things. And so that makes it, I can see the learning curve in this is pretty steep, wouldn't you say, Bode, in terms of just grasping that concept is not the easiest.
Right. And there are some things about this game that that even, go beyond sort of a learning curve, where if you're just trying to get on the same plane as your enemy, which is required for, putting any moves on him, it's not immediately apparent if you are next to your opponent or if you're a little bit too far down or a little bit too far up. Not to mention the fact that the game actually moves in all 3 dimensions. So you can also approach your opponent from the bottom of the ring or the top of the ring.
And part of me thinks that's pretty cool. Okay, I'll give them that. But sometimes I think maybe they could have just left it 2D and made it easier. Does that make it, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, at least being able, I would say that, only still being able to move up and down, sort of like Streets of Rage or something like that, where you couldn't move up and down, just left to right, but still moving on a 3D plane. That would have made things a little bit simpler.
Right. I mean, sort of like WrestleFest is the way I, because it worked great for WrestleFest. And in a lot of ways, WrestleFest is actually is a lot simpler than this. And one of the reasons is, I mean, each wrestler in WrestleFest has got about 6 or 7 moves, maybe 10. Like there's countless moves in this. And like Bode said, they're situational. You get a guy in a headlock, there's 4 moves. You lift a guy, there's 4 moves. The grapple you perform gives you the option of headlock or lift or throw off the ropes. And so really the system to this was put together very logically. The guys behind this originally were not fools. I mean, this was an advanced wrestling title. Back when there were no advanced wrestling. This is easily, like even NES, what was the NES wrestling game everybody loved?
Pro
this
Wrestling?
Is way more advanced than that in terms of your move set, like tons more advanced.
Absolutely. 100%.
And so what makes a wrestling game fun? Tons and tons of moves. Now, that doesn't mean...
Well, I don't know. I'm going to push back against that a little bit, because in my opinion, lots of moves is not what makes a wrestling game fun. What makes a wrestling game fun for me is 3 things. 1, you've got to have good animations of the moves being performed. It doesn't matter how many moves there are. If you put moves in the game, you want to watch your wrestler perform those moves. It's just like watching wrestling on TV. You want to see them and they need to look right. And I will say that this game does a good job of that. This game animates the moves pretty well.
Agree.
Where this game falls flat is the speed of those animations and the amount of time that it takes these animations to play out. So if you are fighting an opponent, and for example, your opponent puts you in the old airplane spin, the old airplane spin isn't just 1 or 2 rotations. It seems like 15 or 20 seconds. Your guy is being spun around in the air, in which your time you're helpless. You have nothing to do but sit there and watch. And that would be cool maybe the first time that you see it, but when it literally happens all the time, that's no good.
Yeah,
so what the first place that this game, it passes on the animation, but it fails on the speed and it fails on how long it takes those animations to play out. Okay?
There are two. What you're saying is true, and there are only 2 major contributors to what you just said that slow it down match. One is that airplane spin, but the other one, it's far worse to me, is throwing a guy off the ropes. In real wrestling, and I say real wrestling, but in real wrestling, when you want to throw a guy off the ropes, you grab him by the arm and you whip him in the ropes. It's an Irish whip, they call it. You Irish whip a guy into the ropes, and he bounces back, and you do whatever. In this game, for whatever reason, the programmers decided to have you twirl the guy around 5 times. I counted. Every time. This is a move that gets done all the time, throwing a guy off the ropes. And so what that means is you just sit there and just watch this over and over. It sucks. If you could, I would love to just get rid of that and get rid of the airplane spin. I believe, now I can't confirm this, but I believe you can actually control how fast you spin your opponent when you've got him up for it. But that's not a move I did that often.
But the CPU wants to milk everything for all it's worth. So they're taking their time when they do these moves.
This is no good. The airplane spin, if you only get it once or twice, that's fine. But I mean, the one where you whip guys in the ropes, that is actually absolutely a total screw up on that. And that I remember playing this back in the day. That's one of the things I didn't like about it. That's one of the biggest faux pas. Now. There are energy bars on either side of the screen, and as you fight wrestlers, their energy goes down, as you would expect. And when it gets down the lowest, it starts to turn red, and then at any time you can go for a pin, but you've got a better chance of getting a pinfall when it's in the red or it's gone. If you're getting pinned, this is something I never knew, Boat, until I read the docs. When I read the docs for this show. When we played this at Hose's house back in the day, we never once successfully kicked out of anything, ever. So we had no idea how to kick out. And so, of course, I think Hose had a liberated copy, so there was no documentation.
Of course.
And so, in the game, what you need to do is basically push up and down on your joystick or your keyboard and to try to kick him out. And it works. I mean, you could actually kick out. I was pleasantly surprised I could kick out, on this. When a guy goes for a pin or you go for a pin, a number will appear. It'll say 1, 2, 3. And if you keep him down for a 3, you win the match. And if you're put down for a 3, you lose. Now, aside from the airplane spin and the rope thing, there are some other things that are detrimental to the game. One thing is, I mean, one of the moves you could do, the basic moves, is just kick a guy, right? And you can pretty much kick a dude until he's almost mauled. One thing that what'll happen is once you put a lot of hurting on a guy, they'll get dizzied. And it's actually beneficial because you can't actually kick a guy until he just falls over and you pin him. Because once they get low enough, they'll basically spin around, do a little pirouette for a while. And, of course, then you can maul them while they're doing that, but you can't just keep kicking them because they move up and down planarly. Is that right, Bode?
Yeah.
And so, but that's something that happens is a dizzy will occur. Did you have, how was your success, Boat, in this game as a whole, and how successful were you at getting off moves and whatnot?
Well, I was very unsuccessful at getting off moves for the first hour that I tried to play this game, because when you attempt to play this game with a joystick, okay, first of all, the keyboard controls in this game are insane in the membrane, okay? Get ready for this. Up is U, down is N, left is H, and right is K. That's no good.
Thankfully, they're reconfigurable, Boat. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't mess around with the keyboard. I want freaking stick action. Give me some Kempston, okay? Well, when you select the stick option, it puts you in player 2. It's like something right out of the CoCo, okay? So that's no good. It took me forever to figure that out because nowhere in the documentation does it say, by the way, you're in the player 2 slot, which I don't even understand how that works because in a regular Spectrum, the Kempston adapter, I'm pretty sure only has one input anyway. So I don't know anything about how that works. Maybe it was something weird with the emulator, but that gave me grief right out of the gate. When I started to play the game, I was unable to do anything. I was definitely able to be spun around by my opponent. Yeah. We didn't mention that when your opponent spins you around and then pins you, he makes some unholy yell when the match is over.
Yeah, we should talk about the sound effects in this. They are jarring, frankly.
Yeah,
I mean, they sound semi-human. But or like someone, I don't know how to explain those sounds, but I'm glad they're in there. They do differentiate this game from most other games.
Yeah, it's a kind of devilry that only the ZX Spectrum can provide.
You know the sound effects that you occasionally hear in Punch-Out, where a guy's like burp burp burp, because that's right. sort of like that, just a random noise. Yeah. It's like, who the hell's saying that?
Right, exactly. And so, I had the most success with this game and the most fun with this game playing in 2-player mode where I had no real opponent to fight. And then I could pull off some moves, I could do some fun stuff. But the second that I went into the ring with a real opponent, because here's the thing, the computer automatically knows when you're in the plane of contact. Okay. You don't know that. So you're jockeying for position. Meanwhile, the computer is just waiting on you. They're waiting for you to fall into that sweet spot. And then they put the moves on you right away. I was unable to beat even the first opponent. I was unable to beat Redneck Phil or whatever his name is. Redneck McCoy.
I beat him in my first game. I took that guy to school.
Wow.
My very first move, walk up to him, kick him 2 or 3 times, pile drive him. Just like, I embedded that hat into his skull right away. This game, it's a lot like, I'm trying to think what I can. You ever play like a golf game or a sports game where you have to, you can't do it, you can't do it. I'll tell you what it's like. It's a lot like playing Dragster, okay? You can't do it. You look like an idiot. And then after a while, all of a sudden, you just kind of, your hand glides into the position, and you're like, I got it. That's what this game was like. I couldn't get the moves off. I couldn't figure it out. And then all of a sudden, I was just like, I got it.
Something clicked.
The positioning and stuff, I figured it out. And so I could do most of the moves. And I got past the first 2 guys. I was pretty proud of myself. Now, I'm like you. I beat up on an inanimate idiot for quite a while to figure out what I was doing, that's a nice option. But yeah, I could get past the first 2 guys. I'm trying to think. The third guy was I think it was the Mohawk guy.
The Mohawk, that would be Vicious Vivian. Let me, I can't let this episode go by without reading. There's these little paragraphs that describe each one of the wrestlers. And I found this nowhere else online. Okay. What you have here, you can see the first line of this, but they've broken these out.
I was hoping you were going to read these, go ahead.
Redneck McCoy has come to the Big Smoke. I guess that's London to try his hand at wrestling. Don't be fooled by his southern hospitality. When he applies the atomic drop, you'll feel like a fence post planted in the South 40. Oh yeah.
That's gold right there.
Okay. Here's the Missouri Breaker, Aaron. This is one mean dude. His style's down and dirty. He gets his strength from throwing cows on his ranch back home in Texas. Watch out for his body slam.
Wow.
Next up is Vicious Vivian, Aaron, just like the young ones. Vivian is no sissy. With a name like that, he quickly learned to take care of himself in any situation. He cut his teeth on the terraces of White Hart Lane and has been laying the boots ever since. I lay the boots sometimes. And finally, Aaron, the last guy, the boss, Lord Toph. Oh, yeah. The most dangerous wrestler in the world today. Lord Toph traces his lineage back to an illegitimate son of James I, Aaron. James I. As far as he's concerned, the British Empire will come again. Little did he know Brexit would happen and that we're on our way, right? No kidding, and he'll do his part when the time comes. Lord Toph is a scientific wrestler. He knows all the moves.
And I love. It's a shame we didn't get all the guys in this. But while we're on the subject of that, let's talk about, just for fun, I looked into a few of the other ports of this. Now, the DOS version and the C64 version look pretty similar, but the ones I want to spotlight a couple here just because I thought they were neat. Which one is the C64 version? Then you've got, I think, the clear winner of Rock and Wrestle, which is the Amstrad version of this.
Yeah, man. That looks great.
The Amstrad version, it gets the crowd. It gets all the bright colors. The guys look like guys. You can see what their gimmick headwear is. I played this. It plays, I mean, they pretty much all play about the same. It may be it may be a tiny bit slower, than the C64 version. But, I mean, I thought it was a pretty decent version. I was surprised at how glorious it looked in comparison with everyone else, Boat. What do you think of that?
It's funny because the Spectrum version gives you the crowd. Yeah. The C64 version gives you the color. The Amstrad version is the only version that gives you both. So the Amstrad wins this round for sure.
I'm assuming that they did that specifically to keep the speed up on those other versions, but that's just a guess. They do run faster. And probably more playable, if you want the truth, but they don't look as nice.
Now, Mitsuyama says in the chat, White Hart Lane was where Tottenham Hotspur played football, so they're kind of suggesting that he's a football hooligan. That's some stuff that went over our heads with that description, Aaron.
There you go. That's why, God bless you. That's why we need you people. We would never have known that. Overall, I'll try to find some reviews on this back in the day. Computer Gamer in their August 86 mentioned that they said although the gameplay is all here, the action seems slower than the other versions, and the graphics are a poor shadow of both the Amstrad and C64 versions, with the wrestlers more silhouettes on the color background. Although this is unavoidable due to the Spectrum attribute problems, it still does distract from the enjoyment of the game. But they still gave it a positive review. So I thought that was pretty nice. Did we get any Discord action on this, Boat?
We did get some Discord action on this. We're going to start things off with Chris Folds. He says, back in 85, some big wrestling fans had an idea for the game. They were way ahead of their time, thinking of all the moves and combos to make a proper wrestling scheme. Then, undeterred by platform power and lack of usable input devices, set about making it. The result is an over-complex control scheme. It's probably hiding a decent game, but as such, I found in 45 minutes of play virtually impenetrable and never got into a flow, and it always felt a fight to do anything. One special mention is the quote from the manual, which is a blatant lie. He says, though looking at the demo game may have given you the impression that Rock and Wrestle is a complex game to play, nothing is further from the truth. So Folds calls that a lie. Oh, he says, sadly, a Folds flop, 4 out of 10.
A Folds flop?
D-Man.
Wow.
Yeah. D-Man writes in, he says, I am far more familiar with the C64 version of this, having played it a lot on a friend's computer back at the turn of the 90s when we all got into the then WWF. This really worked as a stopgap before the official WrestleMania license was released on the 8-bit computers. And
No.
Unfortunately, the Spectrum version is pretty unplayable, a convoluted control scheme, keys don't appear to redefine properly, and the default key selection is horrendous. Graphics and sound, not much good either. Feel like I'm being generous giving it 2 out of 10.
No.
Batman writes, I joined the notorious home computer club in the UK back in the mid-80s. The introductory offer of cheap games proving too difficult to resist. One of the games I got was the awesome Way of the Exploding Fist, a Melbourne House classic which I still enjoy to this day. The next month, being naive and young, I saw Rock and Wrestle by the same software house in the club magazine. I ordered it for nearly full price, sat back and waited in a state of high anticipation. It finally arrived, I loaded it up, and to say it was disappointing was an understatement. Terrible graphics, dire controls, poor sound, practically non-existent gameplay. I could go on. It was one of my first video game disappointments. I was not amused, to put it mildly. Played it once and never went back again. Still have nightmares. 1 out of 10. Ooh, Batman, killing it. Paul, a.k.a. Hermsky, writes a Herm Firm 5.5 out of 10. Not the best of games for the Spectrum, but I can see why it was popular. I remember reading many dissimilar magazine reviews back in the day. It does take a bit of time to familiarize yourself with the game. It's not a game you can just load and play. Bet the pirates hated that. After reading the instructions, I managed to get somewhere with the game, finding it fairly challenging but rewarding when you pull off moves. I'm sure the two-player mode would have been much more entertaining. However, the sprites are really bad, making it difficult to read the moves, and with the poor sound, lets the game down. And Mitz Oyama writes, after I managed to work out that in one-player mode you actually play as player 2 and therefore must define the controls for player 2, I was actually able to move around the ring, pull off some moves, and I did win a couple matches. It did seem to me that they tried to cram too many moves into the game, making it overly complicated. It's more of a simulator than a button masher, so timing moves is crucial. Given time, I may have been able to find the fun in the game. However, my patience quickly ran out, and I wanted to move on to something else. Poor graphics and sound also let it down. 3 out of 10. The reviews were not kind to this one, Aaron.
You know, I'm going to defend this game for a minute, and not on, across the board, okay? Because this really does play much like the other ones. If you're a wrestling fan like me and have been playing a lot of old wrestling games, have you ever heard of a game called Fire Pro Wrestling? And this is sort of along those same lines and how the moves work. It's situational moves, and so while it does appear like it's super complex, it's not really that complex. Once you understand the philosophy of how wrestling works, you know, what you can do from a headlock. And once you understand the different moves you can chain together, it makes perfect sense, to be completely honest with you. Now, you've got a one-button joystick, and you're trying to, yes, like I mentioned, it is ambitious, and it's easy to screw up. And we mentioned some things that they dropped the ball on. But, I mean, overall, I'm going to tell you this, and I mean this across the board, not just the ZX version. This was probably the best wrestling game that was released up to the point at home. I'm trying to think of what I would say. Until something like a Fire Pro or a something that would come out of Japan from Ukes. I mean, in terms of like trying to actually do a lot of cool moves and enjoy a match that's sort of similar to
that's insane. That's insane. There were tons of great wrestling games for the Nintendo that came out before Fire Pro Wrestling.
What? Well, Fire Pro came out on Nintendo, didn't it? I thought it was
like Tecmo World Wrestling. That's a fantastic game.
But it's nowhere near this. It doesn't have the depth that this has. I love that game.
Well, it doesn't have 8 billion moves, but you can't pull off all 8 billion. Like, I guess it depends on what you want. Like, do you want a game where there's 8 billion moves, or do you want a game that's fun to play?
This is fun to play.
You're an idiot. This is not fun to play. No sane person would say this game is fun to play.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would.
You're up against every single one of our Discord community.
You're comparing the NES to the ZX Spectrum. This is an 8-bit game, an 85 game.
85 is not that early, man.
This sort of, hey, listen, you know as well as I do that the hardware limitations on something like the Spectrum were far outmatched when it comes to comparing this to the NES.
It doesn't matter. You could, if there's one thing this show has taught us, is that hardware limitations don't matter when making a fun game. You can make a fun wrestling game for the ZX Spectrum. What you have to do is you have to make it, number 1, you have to make it fast. Number 2, you have to make it colorful. And number 3, you have to make it fun. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and if you do those things, it doesn't matter how many moves you have. Like, okay, let's cut the number of moves by a factor of 4. Give each player only 4 moves, 1 special move, a kick, a special grapple move, and a finishing move. Okay, that is more than enough for a player to have. Think about all the WCW NWO games that were on the N64. There weren't 8 billion moves in that game, but it was a ton of fun.
There were tons of moves in those. And by the way, remember when you talked about Marty Jannetty earlier? And it was proven that you're not a wrestling fan, but you don't know what you're talking about. This is the difference between me and you when it comes to wrestling games. You are a casual fan of a wrestling game. You want to go up and punch a guy and kick a guy and then giggle. I want to play it like I see wrestling on TV. I want to have a wide variety of moves. I want situational stuff. I want to be able to chain stuff together because that's the way real wrestling is. And if you compare the NES wrestling to this, and I like that game, by the way, But I mean, in terms of simulating a wrestling match, it doesn't do as good a job in terms of chaining moves together. I'm not going to go there. The ZX Spectrum version isn't as colorful as, say, the C64 version. But if you, so I'll give it that. It doesn't look as good, but it plays fine. Just, with a few minor exceptions, it's a fun game. So I don't agree with you. You could bury me all you want, but I'm a true wrestling fan and I know what I want. Bam.
Okay. All right. Well, it appears that we are at a stalemate in terms of Rock and Wrestle. So you'll have to play this game and draw your own conclusions. We do want to, just tell everybody thank you so much. We've really had an outpouring of support since we announced a couple weeks ago that we were going to be bringing back our Sinclair on a semi-regular basis. We're going to try our hardest to make this a monthly show. And we've had nothing but positive feedback from on Discord and from beyond Discord. People have been excited to see this show come back. So that does inspire us to keep moving, and we do love doing the show. I want to thank all the people that supported us, either on Ko-fi or on the R Sinclair Patreon page, patreon.com/R Sinclair, Jigglebox, Chris Folds, Steve R, Frodo NL, Christian Russell, Paul, Bossman Harrington, Hermsky, Mark Durham, Eric Nelson, Simulant, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage. If you would like to support us, and if you're a Spectrum fan and you like hearing two American dudes wax poetic about the humble Sinclair, yes, feel free to support the show. We really appreciate it. And Aaron, I've already. Oh yeah, and also, we record the show live on Twitch. So if you're listening to the YouTube version or the audio version of the podcast, if you go to twitch.tv/Amigos Retro Gaming, you can find this is where we stream live from. Again, because our Sinclair is going to be somewhat a regular show, we don't really have a set recording time for that. But you can always just set your thing to be notified whenever we go live, and you can join us in the chat. We have had pretty nice crowd here in the chat, giving us lots of useful real-time feedback. I do want to thank all of the users that are in the chat with us today. We've got our moderators, mega moderators, Duncan Styles, the Dunk, and Pixels of Dawn Gaming are with us. And we also have Amiga Cami is with us, Amiga Bill is with us, and Amiga Live. So we've got the holy trinity of Amiga names there. Awkward Aardvark is with us, Barkbit is with us, Blah Blah 5372, Commander Root, Delamort 78, Emmy K, Frodo NL, Jost 80, Linear Voital, Mitsuyama, Mr. Cola, Paul Kitching, Sanction is with us today, Sin Lao, Super Tech Boy, Tom Toms, Tinfoil, V&K, names I can't pronounce, and Z9K9. Thank you guys so much for joining us live for our Sinclair today. We really appreciate it. Now, Aaron, I have not told you about this yet, but I've already picked our next game. I've picked the next game for our Sinclair. I scanned the shelf of cassette tapes, and I picked one that I think we're going to have a lot of fun with, and that game is Yogi Bear.
This is because of that
if you thought Popeye Wrestling was fun.
Yeah, I knew you were buttering
Yogi Bear, a somewhat classic video game character. Some say that he was the one that grabbed the guitar and smashed it over people's heads. Yogi Bear, a true American hero. We will be taking a look at his outing on the ZX Spectrum when this show comes around again. So, thank you all so much for listening to us. We will see you next time. And until then, rewind tape
and press play.